The Germanic peoples are an Indo-European ethno-linguistic group of Northern European origin, identified by their use of the Germanic languages which diversified out of Proto-Germanic starting during the pre-Roman Iron Age. The term Germanic originated in classical times, when groups of tribes were referred to using this term by Roman authors. For them, the term was not necessarily based upon language, but rather referred to tribal groups and alliances who were considered less civilized and more physically hardened than the Celtic Gauls living in the region of modern France. Tribes referred to as Germanic in that period lived generally to the north and east of the Gauls. Germanic tribes played a major role throughout the history of Europe's development. Modern Germanic peoples include the Norwegians, Swedes, Danes, Icelanders, Germans, French, Austrians, English, Dutch, Afrikaners, Flemish, Frisians, Lowland Scots and others. Ethnonym Germanic in approximately 222 BCE. The first use of the Latin term, Germani, appears in the Faster Capitoline inscription de Gallice in Sagem, which may simply be referring to Gaul or related people, but this may be an inaccurate date since the inscription was erected in about 18 BCE despite referencing an earlier date. Somewhat later, the first surviving detailed discussions of Germany and Germania are those of Julius Caesar, whose memoirs are based on first-hand experience. From Caesar's perspective, Germania was a geographical area of land on the east bank of the Rhine from Gaul, which Caesar left outside direct Roman control. This usage of the word is the origin of the modern concept of Germanic languages, but it was not defined strictly by language. Under other classical authors this sometimes included regions of Sarmatia as well as an area under Roman control on the west bank of the Rhine. Also, at least in the south, there were Celtic peoples still living east of the Rhine or north of the Alps. Caesar, Tacitus and others did note differences of culture which could be found on the east of the Rhine, but all of these cultural notes were around the theme that this was a wild and dangerous region, less civilized than Gaul, a place that required additional military vigilance when traversing the region. Caesar used the term Germani for a very specific tribal grouping in northeastern Belgic Gaul, west of the Rhine, the largest part of which were the Eburones, making clear that he was using the name in the local way. These are the so-called Germani Cisrhenani, whom Caesar believed to be closely related to the peoples east of the Rhine, and descended from immigrants into Gaul. Tacitus suggests that this was the original way the word Germani was used, as the name of a single tribal nation west of the Rhine, ancestral to the Tungri, and not a whole race as it came to mean. He also suggested that two large Belgic tribes neighboring Caesar's Germani, the Nervii and the Treveri, liked to call themselves Germanic in his time, in order not to be associated with Gaulish indolence. Caesar described this group of tribes both as Belgic Gauls and Germani. Gauls are associated with Celtic languages, and the term Germani is associated with Germanic languages. But Caesar did not discuss languages in detail. The geographer Ptolemy described the place where these people lived as Germania, which according to his accounts was bordered by the Rhine, Vistula and Danube rivers, but he also circumscribed into Greater Germania an area which included Jutland and an enormous island known as Scandia. While saying that the Germani had ancestry over the Rhine, Caesar did not describe these tribes as recent immigrants, saying that they had defended themselves some generations earlier from the invading Cimbri and Teutones. It has been claimed, for example by Moritz Gisseling, that the place names of this region show evidence of an early presence of Germanic languages, already in the 2nd century BCE. Celtic culture and language was however clearly influential also, as can be seen in the tribal name of the Eburones, the king's names, Ambiorix and Catavolcus, and also the material culture of the region. The etymology of the word Germani is uncertain. The likeliest theory so far proposed is that it comes from a Gaulish compound of *ger, near, plus *money, men, comparable to Welsh ger, near, Old Irish ger, neighbour, Irish gar, near, garage, neighbourly. Another Celtic possibility is that the name meant noisy, cf. Breton, Cornish garm, shout, Irish gem, call. However, here the vowel does not match, nor does the vowel length in garma release, G 257. Others have proposed a Germanic etymology *Germani, spearmen, cf. Middle Dutch gera, Old High German ger, Old Norse guy. However, the form ger seems far too advanced phonetically for the 1st century, has a long vowel where a short one is expected, and the Latin form has a simplex n, not a geminate. The term Germani, therefore, probably applied to a small group of tribes in northeastern Gaul who may or may not have spoken a Germanic language, and whose links to Germania are unclear. It appears that the Germanic tribes did not have a word to describe themselves, although the word Suebi, used by Caesar to broadly classify Germanic speakers, was likely Germanic in origin. They did, however, use term Walhas to describe outsiders. Roman authors frequently employed the term barbarian, from the Latin derivative barbarus, when describing Germanic peoples. Such a term presupposed a distinctive Roman intellectual and cultural superiority, and their ethnographic treatises on the various barbarian tribes ascribed specific attributes of barbarism to each one so as to delineate the dichotomy between barbarism and civilization. Ironically perhaps, the more the Romans increased their presence along the periphery of their empire, the more trade and employment for the barbarians became available, resulting in an economic boom along the corridors of the Danube River, which subsequently increased the Roman focus upon the Germanic peoples. Use of the modern term German or Germanic is the result of 18th and 19th century classical philology, which envisioned the Germanic language group as occupying a central branch of the Indo-European language tree. Teutonic Latin scholars from the 10th century utilized the adjective Teutonicus, a derivative of Teutones, when referencing East Francia, which in their vernacular was connoted regnum Teutonicum, for that area and all of its subsequent inhabitants. Modern speakers of English still employ the word Teutons when describing Germanic peoples as a result. Historically, the Teutones were only one specific tribe, and may not have even spoken a Germanic language. For example, it is postulated by some scholars that the original Teutonic language may have been a form of Celtic. The source of this confusion, whereby Teutons are lumped into the same category as the others, comes from their contact with the Romans in the 2nd century BC, when they, along with the Cimbri and the Ambrones, led a frightening attack against the Romans. Teuton was the byword the Romans applied to the barbarians from the north, and which they used to describe subsequent Germanic peoples. Under the leadership of Gaius Marius, who built his career on barbarian antagonists, the Teutones became one of the archetypal enemies of the Roman Empire. Classification. By the 1st century CE, the writings of Pomponius Mela, Pliny the Elder, and Tacitus indicate a division of Germanic-speaking peoples into large groupings who shared ancestry and culture. Tacitus, in his Germania, wrote that in their ancient songs, their only way of remembering or recording the past, they celebrate an earth-born god, Tuisco, and his son Manus, as the origin of their race, as their founders. To Manus they assigned 3 sons, from whose names, they say, the coast tribes are called Ingeavones, those of the interior, Herminones, all the rest, Isteavones. Tacitus also specifies that the Suevi are a very large grouping, with many tribes within it, with their own names. The largest, he says, is the Semnones. The Langobardi are fewer, but living surrounded by warlike peoples, and in remoter and better defended areas live the Riudegni, Avionus, Anglii, Verini, Eudoses, the Suadarnes, and Neuthones. Pliny the Elder, on the other hand, names 5 races of Germans in his Historia Naturalis, not 3. By distinguishing the 2 more easterly blocks are Germans, the Vandals, and further east the Bastarnae, who were the first to reach the Black Sea and come in contact with Greek civilization. He is also slightly more specific about the position of the Istvi ones, though he also does not name any examples of them. There are 5 German races, the Vandili, parts of whom are the Burgundians, the Verini, the Carini, and the Guttones. The Ingeavones, forming a second race, a portion of whom are the Cimbri, the Teutoni, and the tribes of the Chaucer. The Esteavones, who join up to the Rhine, and to whom the Cimbri, repeated, belong, are the third race, while the Hermiones, forming a fourth, dwell in the interior, and include the Suva, the Hermundari, the Chatti, and the Cherish. The fifth race is that of the Puccini, who are also the Bastarnae, adjoining the Daci. Note that the remote Verini are listed as being in the Subic or Hermionic group by Tacitus, above, and the Eastern Vandalic or Gothic group by Pliny, so the 2 accounts do not match perfectly. In these accounts and others from the period, emphasis is often made upon the fact that the Suebi and their Hermionic formed an especially large and mobile nation, which at the time were living mainly near the Elbe, both east and west of it. But they were also moving westwards into the lands near the Roman frontier. Pomponius Mela, in his slightly earlier description of the world, places the farthest people of Germania, the Hermiones, somewhere to the east of the Cimbri and the Teutones, and further from Rome, apparently on the Baltic. Strabo, however, describes the Suebi as going through a period where they were pushed back east by the Romans, in the direction from which they had come. The nation of the Suevi is the most considerable, as it extends from the Rhine as far as the Elbe, and even a part of them, as the Hermonduri and the Langobardi, inhabit the country beyond the Elbe, but at the present time these tribes, having been defeated, have retired entirely beyond the Elbe. By the end of the 5th century the term Gothic was used more generally in the historical sources for Pliny's Vandals to the east of the Elbe, including not only the Goths and Vandals, but also the Gepids along the Tisza and the Danube, the Rugians, Scyri and Burgundians, even the Iranian Alans. Linguists postulate that an early Proto-Germanic language existed and was distinguishable from the other Indo-European languages as far back as 500 BCE. The earliest known Germanic inscription was found at Negau on a bronze helmet dating back to the 1st century BC. Some of the other earliest known physical records of the Germanic language appear on stone and wood carvings in runic script from around 200 AD. Runic writing likely disappeared due to the concerted opposition of the Christian Church, which regarded runic text as heathen symbols which supposedly contained inherent magical properties that they associated with the Germanic people's pagan past. Unfortunately, this primitive view ignores the abundance of pious runic writing found on church-related objects when Christianity was introduced into the Germanic North. An important linguistic step was made by the Christian convert Ulfilas, who became a bishop to the Visigoths in AD 341. He subsequently invented an alphabet and translated the scriptures from Greek into Gothic, creating the earliest known translation of the Bible into a Germanic language. From what is known, the early Germanic tribes may have spoken mutually intelligible dialects derived from a common parent language, but there are no written records to verify this fact. Despite their common linguistic framework, by the 5th century AD, the Germanic people were linguistically differentiated and could no longer easily comprehend one another. Nonetheless, the line between Germanic languages and Romance speakers in Central Europe remained at the western mouth of the Rhine River, and while Gaul fell under German domination and was firmly settled by the Franks, the linguistic patterns did not move much. Further west and south in Europe proper, the linguistic presence of the Germanic languages is almost negligible, despite the fact that the Visigoths ruled what is now Spain for upwards of 250 years. There are almost no recognizable Gothic words borrowed into Spanish. The Germanic tribes moved and interacted over the next centuries, and separate dialects among Germanic languages developed down to the present day. Some groups, such as the Suebians, have a continuous recorded existence, and so there is a reasonable confidence that their modern dialects can be traced back to those in classical times. By extension, but sometimes controversially, the names of the sons of Manis, Istvi ones, Irma ones, and Ingvar ones, are also sometimes used to divide up the medieval and modern West Germanic languages. The more easterly groups such as the Vandals are thought to have been united in the use of East Germanic languages, the most famous of which is Gothic. The dialect of the Germanic people who remained in Scandinavia is not generally called Ingvaeonic, but is classified as North Germanic, which developed into Old Norse. Within the West Germanic group, linguists associate the Suebian or Hermionic group with an Elbe Germanic, which developed into Upper German, including modern German. More speculatively, given the lack of any such clear explanation in any classical source, modern linguists sometimes designate the Frankish language as Istvionic, although the geographical term, Weser Rhine Germanic, is often preferred. However, the classical Germani, near the Rhine, to whom the term was originally applied by Caesar, may not have even spoken Germanic languages, let alone a language recognizably ancestral to modern Dutch. The close relatives of Dutch, Low German, Anglo-Saxon and Frisian, are in fact sometimes designated as Ingvaeonic, or alternatively, North Sea Germanic, and Frankish, have continuously been intelligible to some extent with both Ingvaeonic, Low German, and some Suebian, High German dialects, with which they form a spectrum of continental dialects. All these dialects or languages appear to have formed by the mixing of migrating peoples after the time of Caesar, so it is not clear if these medieval dialect divisions correspond to any mentioned by Tacitus and Pliny. Indeed, in Tacitus and in Claudius Ptolemy's geography, the Anglii, ancestors of the Anglo-Saxons, are designated as being a Suebic tribe. By AD 500, West Germanic speakers had apparently developed a distinct language continuum with extensive loaning from Latin, whereas the East Germanic languages were dying out. West Germanic languages include German, Yiddish, Dutch, Luxembourgish, Frisian, and English. North Germanic languages are Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, Faroese and Icelandic. Later manifestations of the Western Germanic languages and the pursuant typological characteristics are due in part to the activities of the Hanseatic League, where trade necessitated a lingua franca from the mainland of Scandinavia all along the navigable shores of the North Sea, and within the Baltic Sea.